Greetings all. Stafford Magnus, one of my patrons, asked a question for the Q&A about the 17-pounder cannon. Given it is such a popular subject, and it's also something which I put up various scattered articles and videos, I thought it would be worthwhile to make a short video purely on point. And there are some misconceptions over my opinion on the gun, and I may as well both put out both hard fact and also personal observation. I do try to distinguish between the two. I'm not going to go over the developmental or operational history here, it's not relevant. The question he posed was, how did the 17-pounder accuracy rate compare to the US 76 and 90mm guns? Did they fix the sabot issues by the end of the war, and were regular AP shells comparable? Was it the muzzle brake interfering, or something else? The bottom line answer is that the 17-pounder was less accurate. Now I can just put up this assessment from the US test reports and end the question right there. That figures just for the regular shot. 17-pounder was famously inaccurate in the case of sabot ammunition. However, it's a relative term. Just because the 76mm was almost twice as accurate doesn't make the 17-pounder particularly inaccurate. The 76mm was one of the most accurate guns out there, and it set a heck of a high bar. In post-war testing, the US found that APCBC fired from Firefly's 17-pounder was putting 30-inch groups at 1500 yards. And that includes the outliers. Most rounds at that range were coming within an area maybe 18 inches by 12. There were the occasional stray rounds, which ruined the overall grouping figure. For whatever reason, the grouping was more or less similar at 1000 yards, and at 500 yards, the round would go to within 6 inches of where you aimed it, assuming you aimed correctly to account for the parallax between the sight and the gun. Doing their mathematical analysis, they figured the gun was accurate to about 0.195 mils. So at 1000 yards, you could expect that a typical round would land within 20 centimeters, one side or the other, of the aim point. Not guaranteed to come within that distance, but a good enough chance to take the shot. If you're shooting at a tank-sized target, or even a tank turret-sized target, in theory that should be good enough to score a hit. It does mean that you need to be perhaps a little bit precise in your lay, but I think one can safely call it serviceably accurate. The equivalent mil figures for the American guns are about 0.13 for the 90mm and 0.11 for the 76mm. Thus, the American guns were a little bit more forgiving of imprecise lay. On the other hand, at 2600 feet per second for the 76 or 2700 for the 90, they come out as slower than the 2950 of the 17-pounder, which means that the 17-pounder is a little easier to lead on a moving target and a little bit less vulnerable to range estimation error, assuming all other aiming factors are the same. Things get a bit different when you start to look at the hot ammo. At 3400 feet per second, the 76mm HVAP was considered more accurate than even the standard APC. 90mm HVAP was also an equal enough 3350. It was rare in World War II, but then so were suitable tanks to shoot at it with. Sabot for the 17-pounder came out at a whopping 3,950 feet per second and did a right number on anything you hit. But you had difficulty hitting the broadside of a barn. British documentation indicated that it was not considered worth shooting at over 500 yards, and the Americans felt it was viable only at even less ranges. The British brushed off the SVDS inaccuracy at the American Insignia test by saying that they just had a bad lot of ammunition, which somehow found its way to the field. But post-war American testing wasn't any better. British reports dated September 44 indicated a mere 50% chance of hit on a Panther turret at 400 yards, versus 90% for regular ammo. At 600 yards, the chance falls to 1 in 3. And at 800 yards, you're still more likely to hit than not with regular APC, but it's 1 chance in 5 for SVDS. When the US tested, they managed to get 8 out of 10 hits on a 6x6 target at 500 yards with sabot, and after 18 rounds at 1000 yards, they just gave up. At 500 yards, they figured the mil accuracy to be around 0.7, just over 3 times worse than the APCBC, which about matches with the British figures. The cause of this seems universally to be pointed at the sabot separation, but that's where things start getting a little bit hazy. The same projectile fired from Comet's 77mm gun, which also has the same bulbous muzzle brake, is not known to have had any accuracy issues at all. The main difference between the two is in muzzle velocity, the Comet's being some 20% less at 3675 feet per second. Therefore, it seems that whatever causes the problem, it apparently manifests itself in excess of 3700 feet per second. Of interest, British reporting, and War Office Report 291/751 if you're curious, also rates the APC round from Comet as being more accurate than the same projectile from Firefly, although it's more matter of degree. If you're hunting, also look for WO's 291/1263 and 165/135. Then you have the matter of fixing the problem. I often hear folks claiming that the British fixed their SVDS accuracy issues by the end of World War II, but nobody has as yet provided me with any documentary evidence of this. Certainly the ammunition was still considered to have room for improvement because by 1952, a rubber sabot sleeve was issued to mount on the SVDS shots Marks 1, 2 and 3 for the 17-pounder. It was not issued for the same projectile on Comet. Again, the Comet round was considered to be good enough already. Similarly, a new pot sabot design was created by the Canadians. And the note of issuance for the sleeve also says that it doesn't do anything to help Canadian ammunition either. Right, a moment of silence for the last microphone. One of those occupational hazards is destruction of microphones and not noticing it until it's time to edit. And this is one of those reasons why even those who work exclusively from home could do with a bit of Patreon support, because these little ankle biter costs can really start to add up. Anyway, I was saying that the Canadian pot sabot wasn't released until 1946, making it a non-issue in World War II. The figures on penetration are easily available online. It was basically the most reliable hole puncture the Western Allies had. The amount of times it made a practical difference was likely limited enough, but it was certainly better. And if you were firing at 300 meters or less, once SVDS entered the picture, there was very little which could stand up to it. Now, you will recall I earlier used the term all other factors being equal. Accuracy also depends on the mount and fire technique. Firefly was known for having great difficulty in spotting fall of shot, especially given that standard practice to avoid being blinded by the muzzle flash was to close one's eyes when shooting. This meant that the adjustment of fire onto a target after a miss was more difficult. It wasn't really until Centurion came along that a truly useful mount for easy aiming of the 17-pounder as a tank gun was provided. And I think this is where people misrepresent my opinion on 17-pounder. I've just shown that it's serviceably accurate, and we know it's quite powerful. My objection to it is in its inefficient mounting in the Sherman, which requires so many compromises that the relative advantages of armor punch are, in my opinion, and that of the US's Armored Board, more than counterbalanced by the disadvantages of the installation. Others disagree. It is, at the very least, a matter of contention. Of course, the 17-pounder wasn't developed as a tank gun anyway. It was developed as an anti-tank gun. Its effectiveness in a towed role is subject to the same limitations of all late-war anti-tank guns, of just being too damn big, heavy, and unwieldy. But in self-propelled mountings, there's really nothing significantly wrong with it. The SPMs tended to provide ample working space, and given that the other tank jobs of machine gunning folks or lobbing HE at them, both of which Firefly installation had issues with in comparison, just aren't particularly relevant. So bottom line, 17-pounder basic ammunition was acceptably accurate, not amazing, but good enough, and it hit about as hard as even the rare special ammunition fired by the closest competitor, the 76mm. SVDS ammo, when it finally showed up, was useful at very close range only, and it remained that way throughout the war. It was more serviceable after the war if you were Canadian, and if you were firing British ammo, you had to wait basically until the 1950s before you got the good stuff, which meant that all those ISs looking at you from the other side of the Iron Curtain are suddenly starting to look really quite intimidating. All right, so I hope that about covers the 17-pounder question. I don't need to come back to this again. One, alibi. And I don't know why the US Army uses the term alibi to mean something I forgot to mention earlier, as opposed to I have an excuse. But anyway, when I'm writing, I abbreviate pounder as PR, not the more common PDR. Both are legitimate abbreviations, and you will see both in the official documentation, such as the manuals. However, if you look at the markings actually engraved into the gun or painted onto the ammunition, the abbreviation is PR. So that's what I use. That's it. See you next time.